22 is another episode I never got into when I first saw it, but my mind has changed slightly over time, as I now know its true worth. We have another tale which was based on a short story named The Bus Conductor. However, it's debated whether or not it was a faithful retelling or a loose adaptation which took partial elements from it. I myself have never read it, but diehard fans will likely bring up this old flame war. Though one very cool fact is that this was one of those Twilight Zone tales which inspired a beloved horror franchise cherished today. I'll tell you soon, but you'll likely figure out which when we get through the synopsis. In this episode, we follow Miss Liz Powell, a professional stripper, dancer, who's staying at her local hospital to treat herself after suffering from a recurring nightmare triggering her anxiety. Much like Perchance to Dream in King 9, the Twilight Zone does a phenomenal job playing out this David Lynch-style nightmare sequence, where our protagonist gets lost in a dark, creepy hospital, as she trails a shadowy nurse all the way down to the basement morgue, labeled Room 22.
There it is!
But just when she checks it out, the creepy nurse jump scares her and leaves a haunting welcome.
Room for one more, honey.
Yeah, I'd scream too if I met Spock's psycho ex-girlfriend T'Pring. Every time she gets jump scared by the scary nurse, she awakens. But because this nightmare keeps happening to her, Liz thinks there must be more to this dream than pure randomness. Basically, a good portion of this episode is the recurring nightmare, followed by Liz talking with her friends and doctor about the dream. But the other characters try to help her accept that this nightmare is just that, a bad dream. Yep, our favorite cliche returns. The singled out protagonist believes supernatural terrors afoot, and nobody believes them.
Ooga booga booga! Well, if he's not going to do anything...
Now, unlike most bad cases of this trope, the protagonist hasn't really encountered odd stuff in reality, and is shown to be exhausted and sleep-deprived, so there's enough space to debate if her nightmare is magic or not. Though, not to nitpick, but the acting in this episode is very weird. This is one of those Twilight Zone tales where the actors really try to overplay the terror, and some of their normal dialogue can come across as a bit funny at times.
You make an old doctor wish he were a young intern.
It's nothing too distracting, but it can go from Twilight Zone to Goosebumps at times. Thankfully, I love this episode's nightmare world, since it totally feels like a horror scenario, and flawlessly displays the Twilight Zone's talent for creepy imagery. Eventually, the doctors are forced to sedate Liz after another night terror, but after finally getting a good night's sleep without dreaming, the doctors eventually come to the conclusion that she just needed bed rest after her exhaustion from never calming down in the past few days. So she gets released after chilling out for a weekend and soon gets ready for her return flight back home. However, things take a dark turn when she begins reliving moments from her dream. She does similar actions akin to her venture in the spooky asylum, is booked for Flight 22, sees 22 everywhere, and before she boards her ride, spots a familiar face.
Room for one more, honey.
So, to get out of here, I just make a left out of the driveway and drive as fast as I can?
Liz realizes that her nightmare has become reality and avoids going on her plane. Just when she assumes she's snapped again, Flight 22 suddenly explodes, killing everybody on board as Liz is the sole survivor. Yeah, the plane just explodes. No joke, nothing we see apparently triggered it. The ride just blew blew up, and
Everyone died. The end.
I guess our old pals the Aqua Teens were on board too. The twist ending reveals that, no Kitten, Liz's nightmares were really Final Destination premonitions warning her of her approaching death. And after picking up on the omens, she narrowly avoids dying on a flight which was scheduled for death. Our hero lives because she took a leap of faith by trusting her dreams, because they were a warning of what was to come. If you haven't figured it out, this tale inspired the creation of the Final Destination saga, right down to the same accident of a plane destruction. However, Final Destination had the same setup, but focuses more on the over-the-top or hilarious deaths, while the Twilight Zone focuses more on the premonitions and the meaning behind dreams. To make the episode even creepier, there's tiny hints and clues spread out all across to show our protagonist isn't loony, such as her knowing the exact room of the hospital's morgue without ever seeing it, events foreshadowed later, and the number 22 being her 180. I like this episode because of this aspect. This tale basically asks us, what if our dreams weren't just our imagination? What if our dreams actually contained messages from the future? You ever had one of those moments where you remember something in a dream/nightmare only to have deja vu in the real world where something you thought up actually happens to you sometime later? Well, this episode taps upon that concept and gave a truly fun tale of suspense dedicated to that ominous idea. That's something which made me appreciate this episode a whole lot more, since there's some ambiguous fridge horror which makes you think.
Yes, quite good.
Indeed.
Most certainly.
This is another tale which is saved by its big twist, since it makes the episode way creepier when this massive travesty happens, and the entire time she was being warned about the future without knowing it. Reminds me of the Haunting Hour's Black Mask in a way, since it dives into our fears of not knowing what's happening, or the meaning behind an approaching dread we don't know how to handle. How horrifying is the idea that our dreams contain predictions of the future, which makes you question your reality. Well, horrifying enough to make a dang good Final Destination prequel, that's for sure. So, I grant 22 a silver skull. Sadly, not a perfect victory, since I do have some issues with the pacing of this one, and did get bored during long exposition scenes. However, I think this is one of the more subtle horror stories that makes us fear an unknown world of uncertainty, thanks to its usage of dreams as a vague messenger of darkness to come. I recommend checking it out if you just want more of the out there sci-fi concepts from the series. It's not as popular as Perchance to Dream or A Stop at Willoughby, but it's a fun mind-screw horror with a creepy sense of unease. Truly a lil number you'll want to remember.
Save room for dessert.
The Twilight Zone.